My name is Kelsey, and I'm going to be explaining how to create tables on Access. We're going to go to Table Design. The first field name is going to be Student ID, which is going to be number. And then first name, short text, last name, short text. And we're going to set the student ID as the primary key. And we're going to save it as students. Then enter the data. And we're going to save, and then go to Create, Table Design. This one is going to be Class ID, number, course name, short text, section number, term, short text, and credit hours, number. And then we're going to set the class ID as the primary key and save this one as classes. And we're going to go to Table View and enter the data. Okay, I'm going to save. I'm going to create table design. And this one is going to be ID. With auto number. Then class ID. Number. Student ID. Number. And hours studied. Number. Then decimal places. 2. Then we're going to set the ID as the primary key. We're going to save this table as students and classes. Okay. We're going to go to this and increase the decimal and then decrease it to where there's 2 decimal places. And then we're going to save. And that is how you create the tables in Access.
My name is Matthew Ramsdale, and I'm going to show you how to create queries. So once we have all these data sets set up, we're going to close them. And it's important because we're going to create relationships. So relationships, go to Database Tools, click Relationships, and this little table will show up with all the tables we just created. So I like to drag them, so I'm going to do classes, students, and then students and classes like this. So we'll have like this little way. So class ID and student ID are shared there's a relationship between the 3 data sets. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this student ID and match it up with this student ID. We're going to create a one-to-many relationship. We're also going to reinforce referential integrity because there's data set already in the tables. So when we create it, it's going to create this little visual right here saying that they're related. We're going to do the same thing with class ID to class ID. And force referential integrity and create it. So we'll have these relationships between these data sets now. And this is important for when we create queries, which is what we're going to do next. Okay, so make sure you save this relationships. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to create queries. So the first question is, how often did Potter study for his classes this semester? Create the query needed to find this answer and save the query as Potter studied time per class. So we're going to go create query design. And again, it's going to pop this little table. So instead of clicking and dragging, you can add them. So like this. And what we're going to do is it'll show you the relationships again. All right, so for this one, we want to see how much Potter, the last name, studied for his classes. So we're going to do course name. We're going to do credit hours. And we're going to do hours studied. So it's automatically going to put them down there for you. Alright, so what we're going to do now is, since we don't want to see every student's last name, we only want to see Harry Potter's last name, we're going to put capital P, O-T-T-E-R, and press enter. And then what it's going to do, it's going to just only show the results with his name. So we'll click run, and here we go. So the first query is Potter with his courses that he's taking, credit hours that he's taking, and the hours that he has studied for this. So what we're going to do is when we save this, it's going to ask you for the query name. We're going to name it as Potter studied time per class. So now that we have that, we can move on to the next question. How often should Potter have studied per class? Save the query as Potter required study time. So, as you can see here, the following is credit hours per class times 2 is the required study time per class. So we're going to do create, we're going to do query design again, and we're going to put all 3 of them up again. Close the box. And so we want the last name again. We want the course name. We want the credit hours. We want the hours studied. And for this last box, since we don't have one called required study time, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create an expression. So we're going to put a bracket. We're going to do credit hours, capital C. Got to make sure it matches up with the thing we already have in there, times 2. And when we hit enter, it's going to say an expression 1. And what that means is it's going to save it in the table as expr1, and we want it to be named as required study time. So when we hit run, it's going to pull up this information, but you'll see that I made a mistake and I didn't restrict it to Potter. So we click here, go to design view. If you mess up, you can go to design view. We're going to scroll back over, and for criteria, we're going to put Potter again. Not Potter's study time for class, just Potter. And so when you hit run again, it's going to label it down to Potter. And so if you want to see the entire thing, so you just double click the tables like that, and it'll show the entire table. You're also going to save it as Potter required study time. So that's 2 questions down, and our third question is, how much additional time should Potter study per class? Save your query as Potter study time efficiency. So we're going to create another one, another query design. And so we'll bring all of them out again. Classes, students, students and classes. And so we want the last name. Oops. We want the course name. We want the credit hours. The required study time, which is, again, credit hours times 2, in which we change it again. Required study time. And then we want hours studied, which is right here. And so for the study time efficiency, what we're going to do is we're going to do a subtraction. So we're going to take the credit hours, or the required study time, minus the hours studied. So what we're going to do is we're going to do required study time minus hours studied. And we're going to save this, not as expression 1, but as study time efficiency. We're going to run this. And again, I forgot to restrict it to only Potter. So you go to Criteria, Potter, click Run. Oh, I put it in the wrong criteria. You have to make sure you put the criteria in the right section. So we're going to do last name for Potter. Click Run, and there we go. So we have last name, the course name, the credit hours, required study time, hours studied, and study time proficiency. So you'll see 2 minus 1 is 1, 6 minus 3 is 3, 6 minus 2 is 4, 6 minus 3 is 3, 8 minus 3 is 5. So you're going to save this as Potter study time efficiency, and you'll save it under your queries. Okay, so this last one's a little bit trickier. So overall, how much additional time should Potter study? Save your query as Potter sums total. So same process, create query design. And we're going to want classes, we want students, and we want students and classes. So we have that relationship set up. So we want the last name, we want the credit hours, and we want the sum of the required study time. So what we're going to do is we're going to do sum of required study time, colon, and that was credit hours. Well, what we can actually do is what we were doing before. We do credit hours with little brackets. Times 2. Save that as required study time, or sum of required study time. But what we're going to do is, because that's not just a sum by itself, so what we have to do is we have to show totals. So add this totals column right here. So it's going to group by the last name, group by credit hours, and for this one we're going to put sum. So it is credit hours times 2. So what it's going to do is it's going to add up every single time the credit hours times 2 for each row. It's going to add them all together. So what we're going to do next is the hours studied. So we already have a table for that one. So we just go hours studied. It's going to group by again. But I think we want the sum of the hours studied. So we're going to sum of hours studied. It's ascending, so it's fine. So for the last one, we're doing study time efficiency. So that's going to be the credit hours times 2 minus the hours studied. And again, we're looking for the sum. We're also not going to call it expression 1. We're going to call it study time deficiency. So what we're going to do is we have to make sure everything's ready. So this said group by a minute ago. We're going to change that to sum. Sum of required study time times 2, sum, and that looks good to me, so we'll hit run. And so the sum of the credit hours is 14, sum of the, let's put these open. Sum of the required study time is 28, sum of hours total is 12, and the study time deficiency is 16. So we need to study 16 additional hours in order to get good grades as well. We're also going to have to change this to sum of study time, not just study time deficiency, since we already have study time deficiency in another one. So when you click run again, it'll show up as sum of study time deficiency. And lastly, we have to save the query. So we're going to go to save. I'm going to click or save it as Potter sum total. We'll save under our queries, and that's it. That's how you create a database. So you have classes, students and classes. We have answered 4 questions here: the required study time, the study time per class, the study time deficiency, and the sum of all of those. So I hope that this helped.